my name is Jennifer O'Neill, and I'm here in this video series talking about CSRS 4200, the Compilation Engagement Standard, and answering some of your questions. So another question that I get quite frequently is, how much do I need to document? They have all these new documentation requirements about the entity. How much do I have to do? And then the question that goes with that is there such thing as too much documentation? So it is two different questions. One is that the standard does now have requirements about documenting and understanding about the entity. So you need to make sure that you have enough information about that entity to be able to assess whether something in the compiled financial information is misleading. So there's two different areas that the standard requires us to obtain knowledge about. One is its business and operations. So what are their financial statements supposed to look like? What are their assets, their liabilities, their revenues and expenses? And what about their business and operations? How big is it? Is there any complexity? What is it, the nature of what they do? Now, this one in particular, when I talk to practitioners, this is not an issue. You guys all know what your clients do. It's really just a matter of getting out of your head and into those working papers. You need to have enough documentation so that someone who is still experienced in accounting and in assurance can understand what you've done and why you've done it. But maybe they just wouldn't have the same knowledge of your client as you do, but they should still understand what you've done and why you've done it. The second thing we need to understand is the accounting records and systems. So just at a very high level, how are those transactions recorded and classified and summarized within the entity's financial records and systems? So this is going to help us understand what type of accounting adjustments might you come into. If there is anything that is complex, or every year that you are going to have to book a certain number of transactions, at least you'll know that up front. And it's also going to help us with understanding whether or not that information is misleading. So obtaining that knowledge of the entity, it really isn't a one-time event. It's in your head now. Get it down. What do you know? Take a look at last year's working papers. If it is a continuing engagement, see what is there. You're going to have some discussions with management or with maybe some other individuals within the entity. And maybe you've done some other engagements for the entity as well. There's been some tax planning or some consulting services. And you may also have other clients that you have worked on before. So that previous experience within the industry through other engagements is also important. Now, we still are not doing any work over accuracy or completeness, and that really goes into how much documentation is too much. There isn't such thing as too much documentation. It really is more what is the role that you're playing. You can document as much as you like, but when you start to cross the line is when you start to maybe advocate for your client. You're talking to the bank, you're talking to maybe another lender or somebody outside the entity, even somebody within the entity, and you've given them the impression that you've actually done more work than you have. So that compilation engagement report is very clear. You haven't done any work around accuracy or completeness, but you might have done that work for tax purposes, for consulting purposes. There's a lot of other reasons. And it doesn't make sense just to take it out of the working paper. I know that we've had this discussion. I've had this discussion with multiple firms about what do I do with this working paper. The working paper itself, just put the objective. Why is it in there? You're doing it for tax purposes, just make it known. But more than that is not what you put in the file, it's what you're telling to other people. So if you are saying that, you have, giving the impression that you have done some work around accuracy and around completeness, then what the courts are going to say is that, well, you might have put that report on, but it was very clear through your discussions that you did something more. that's when you're going to run into trouble. So be very careful in advocating for your client and answering questions for the bank. All of the time, I would push those back and not answer those questions. Have management do that. And then that keeps the separation very clear. So hopefully that helps. And we will be in touch with more of your questions.